thank you so much, Deb and Joe, for that warm welcome. And truly thank you all for being here on this, is it an unseasonably rainy week and day? I'm actually reminded of when we had Fiona Hill here and there was a snowstorm during her presentation. So this feels like a homecoming to this.
I didn't bring it. I came from Arizona. So
it feels like a homecoming. And I know we're all here tonight really with a lot of worry on our minds and a lot of probably reeling in some ways with all of the news that's been coming out of the Middle East in particular over the past couple of months. And so this is just a wonderful opportunity to learn from Ambassador Grappo, who has such rich, amazing, multi-decades of experience in the region. And I really look forward to the conversation tonight. And as Joe mentioned, we will have a lot of time for audience Q&A. So do think about what you'd like to ask the ambassador. We've got a tentative but very complicated ceasefire in the war in Iran. We've got a very difficult situation in the Strait of Hormuz. We've got ongoing conflict, even despite a shaky ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. There's a lot happening in this region. And so you've worked, Ambassador, on the Middle East for many decades, and I'm wondering if you can begin tonight by really grounding us in 2 or 3 of the most important things that are happening specifically, I would say, about the war in Iran and about Iran right now, since I think that's top of mind for everybody. Can you kind of help us understand what we really should be noticing and paying attention to?
Of course. Yeah, by the way, it's a pleasure to join you all this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm especially honored to join my colleague from Korbel, Professor Berry, who in her own right is a very well-known, nationally recognized scholar and teacher. On the subject of Iran and maybe the greater Middle East, several things need to be mentioned. Some people have attributed the start of this war to President Trump. He did not start the war. This is a war that has been going on for 47 years. We have been a declared enemy of the Islamic Republic ever since its inception in 1979. And they've made that very obvious. They've never tried to disguise it. By the way, the state of Israel as well, never tried to disguise it. When you hear the slogan, death to America and death to Israel, it's not a slogan. It's their creed. Very simple. There's a third pillar of this platform, and Professor Berry and I are going to get to that maybe later on. But nevertheless, this is what they fundamentally believe, based on their grand plan, if you can call it that, for the Middle East. They truly want to be the principal hegemon in the Middle East. They refer to themselves as the al-Qum. In Arabic, it's Markaz al-Islam, the center of Islam. Now, if you're sitting in Riyadh or in Cairo, those are not words that you want to hear coming from predominantly Shia Islam, Iran. Very offensive. And I've had many, many Muslims, not necessarily clerics, who have told me that. But that's one of their objectives. They truly want to lead a pan-Islamic movement. Beyond the Middle East, unclear. But in the Middle East, they truly want to be the hegemon. Well, if you want to be the hegemon in the Middle East, there are a couple of countries you're going to have to confront. The United States, first and foremost. We're very present in the Middle East, diplomatically, militarily, economically, on virtually every front. The United States is very front and center in the Middle East. They're especially appalled and offended by Western culture. So when you hear them say death to America, death to Israel, it's really the West. They truly want Western influence out of the Middle East. At the time of the Islamic Revolution, of course, it was the Cold War, 1979. They were as adamantly opposed to the Soviet Union, where its Western philosophy of communism. They didn't want that either. They didn't want capitalism. They didn't want democracy. They didn't want communism. They didn't want the West. And this has been their guiding principle throughout. Their defense strategy, and this is really important in this moment, their defense strategy is first and foremost regime survival, more than anything else. And because it's survival, they have planned for, first, the United States. Because if you're going to go to war against the United States, you better be pretty well prepared. We have an enormous armed forces, as they have now experienced on several occasions already. And they have, for example, in terms of regime continuation in the event of an attack by the United States, they have prepared at every level leadership to step in. And so when the United States and Israel attacked and took out the top levels of Iranian leadership, including the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, his son was right there to step in. Now, of course, he's incapacitated. In fact, a lot of the leadership was killed during those first days of attacks. And they were able to step in, really didn't miss a step at all. And it's very interesting to note who has stepped in, because if we thought the previous crowd was hardline, these are even more hardline. And his son, we don't know his condition. He's incapacitated, but apparently is approving decisions, but almost all of those are being handed to him by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And this is an organization we really need to understand, because they're not like any other armed forces around the world. They're deeply enmeshed in the ideology of Shia Islam and complete unconditional loyalty to the supreme leader. From the lowest ranking private in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to the ranking generals. The ranking generals now in the Supreme National Security Council, there are about 3 of them on there, and a number of officials who are former generals, all served in the Guard Corps and have been indoctrinated with this principle of serving the supreme leader and remaining loyal to the principles of the Islamic Revolution. They're not called the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, a mistake some people make. It's Islamic. They're committed to protecting the Islamic Revolution. I'll make one final point. The overall principle of the leadership in Iran, maybe we can get into it in the Q&A, some more detail, but is a principle called Velayat al-Faqih. Velayat al-Faqih means guidance of the jurisprudent. The jurisprudent is the jurisprudent, capital letters, is the supreme leader, now deceased and succeeded by his son. And everyone is answerable to him, regardless of where they are in the government structure. And any decision that is made elsewhere in the government, because that's a whole separate sort of a parallel to the normal structure of government that you would recognize from any government. Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Education, Natural Resources, Oil, you name it. They have all of that. It looks like any other government. But then over here you have another structure, almost all of which is controlled by the supreme leader. And with this principle of Velayat al-Faqih, they're effectively saying, we will defer all decisions to him. Now, he doesn't make all decisions, but in the event of any controversy, disagreement, critical decision, it will go to the supreme leader. So in that sense, it is most definitely the supreme version of an autocracy. So these are some of the fundamental principles, and we can get into maybe some more details later on.
I think that raises, I mean, so many questions, right? One of the questions off the top of my head is just, was the Trump administration aware fully of the layers of leadership? Do we, and maybe to jump on that as well, like, are there fissures in any parts of the leadership structure in Iran which might be leverage points at this moment for U.S. kind of for this particular conflict?
With respect to your first question, Marie, I don't know how much President Trump knew. If he was genuinely interested, okay, what do I need to know about their leadership? What do I need to know about the IRGC? What do I need to know about the survivability? What do I need to know about the Strait of Hormuz? Because there are people in the State Department, in the CIA, the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and in the Defense Department who could have briefed him in detail on all of those issues. To what extent that may have occurred, I have no idea, because he limits his circle of advisors to a handful of people, including this group of, I call them weekend negotiators, that he dispatches, whether it's to Gaza or to Moscow or to Islamabad. And they are not diplomats, they're not negotiators. Okay, they've done a lot of great real estate deals, terrific. That ain't diplomacy. It's a different gig. And so I really don't know how much he knew. I do know that General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, had told him in one of his final meetings before going to war that there is a strong possibility that the Iranians would close the Strait of Hormuz. And the reported response of the president was, well, once we decapitate the regime, that won't be a problem. Yes, it will. If you understand how they have designed their regime for survivability, they're all on the same page. There's only one script for how this regime operates, and everybody knows it. And the individuals in charge now is pretty much the top generals in the IRGC. We can get to what that means in terms of Iran's future. The second question, which was...
Fissures. Are there fissures in the regime, or is it super consolidated in the way that it sounds
previously,
like it may be?
You could say they were very consolidated. When the supreme leader was killed in the initial round of attacks, and a number of other leaders were taken out, quite a few. Why they would ever meet in one place together, I'll never understand. But I guess if the president and the most senior leaders of our government can be at the Hilton Hotel for the White House Press Association dinner, I guess it can happen. And so they're all in one place, and the American and Israeli intelligence got wind of it, and we had them dialed in, and that was the end of that. And Mojtaba Khamenei, the son, the only one who survived, the only one, and only barely. And so you have the president, President Pezeshkian, who was popularly elected in Iran, but with limited powers, and is the titular chair of the Supreme National Security Council. But he's being basically outvoted by the secretary, who replaced a previously hardline pragmatist, Ali Larijani, who was killed in a round of attacks now about a month ago. And he's very hardline. His name is Ahmed Velati. And Vahidi, very, very hardline his whole life. He earned his stripes fighting in the Iran-Iraq War, which after World War II was the deadliest war on planet Earth for the last half of the century. Over 1 million and that's a very conservative estimate. Iranians and Iraqis died in that war, 8 years. And many of the other top leaders earned their stripes and developed their relationships, their network, fighting in that war. And all of them now are in the top leadership of the IRGC, or they've gone from the IRGC into the civilian side, but they still pretty much embrace the same ideology. There is now, for the first time, appearing fragmentation. I was just reading recently that Pezeshkian, the president, who felt very much marginalized, that he was not able to convey what he thought were essential priorities, namely addressing the growing economic troubles of the country writ large and of individual Iranian people. And was trying to do that. And the other sort of pragmatist, if you can call him that, is the Speaker of the Parliament. His name is Ghalibath, Ghalibath. Also, the same concerns. Now, he's a popularly elected representative, and then within the Parliament, he was elected as a Speaker. They have been sidelined heretofore, but now are trying to reassert themselves in the Supreme National Security Council, because right now the IRGC is calling the shots. The IRGC, which is about a 600,000 person, mostly men, force, very committed, very dedicated to the principles of the revolution. And they've all got guns. They've gotten the lion's share of defense spending. There is another military force, the usual military force that we would all recognize: Army, Navy, Air Force. It's called the Artesh. They're much larger. They probably don't get the same level of resources. In fact, we know for a fact from intelligence reporting, they don't get the resources, and they certainly don't have the political clout that the IRGC does. The IRGC is basically there to serve the supreme leader as his palace guard and to protect the revolution. And they are profoundly motivated. And when we talk about the president and his understanding of Iran, we grossly underestimated, and the Israelis too. We estimated the resilience, the resolve, and the tenacity of the regime. These guys will only be carried out. They are truly committed. And I know I've used that word a lot, but I can't overuse it. It's hard to describe, and they're very, very loyal, and it will be very hard to move them. And we've discovered that. If any thoughts anyone had entertained of regime change, they were living in a fairy tale, because you're not going to be able to do that. Certainly not by an air assault and missile assault. It's not going to. Of course, it never worked. We should have learned that a lesson during Vietnam.
Well, it's stunning to think of a palace guard as strong as 600,000 incredibly committed people, right? This is not a small force.
No.
This is massive. Can you give us your assessment about the nuclear question right now in Iran and how successful the U.S. has been? I know there's conflicting intelligence reports. I know there's misinformation and statements coming out of our administration in the U.S., but I'm just curious to hear what your general sense is of whether or not there's been any sort of hit or diminishing capacity of their nuclear arsenal.
Okay, I just want to add one other footnote with respect to the IRGC. That's not the whole story. They have a paramilitary force nationwide at every level in the country, at the provincial level, the local level, the village level, called the Besiege, who are also heavily indoctrinated. And these are the folks who basically follow everyone, listen to everyone. They're responsible for reporting on what's happening in their neighborhood, their town, whatever. This is why it's been very hard to organize any kind of an opposition, because you're going to be found out. And If you're found out, there are only two options: the grave or life in prison. And so we know there's an opposition. We can't tell how organized they are because they can't do anything because of the besiege in the RGC. With respect to the nuclear question, which has been now a question that dates back to the early 2000s, when we and European colleagues began to realize that the Iranians were, in truth, pursuing the development of a nuclear weapon. We were ready to start taking action, but the Europeans negotiated an agreement with the Iranians. This was around 2002, 2003, and we were willing to live with it. We didn't like it, but we were willing to live with it. But then European intelligence, the British and the French and others, and we discovered that they were violating that agreement. And that's when all kinds of sanctions began to kick in, because we mobilized the Europeans. We even got the Russians and Chinese, that was a different world, on board to impose really extraordinary sanctions, which ultimately brought the regime to the negotiating table during the administration of Barack Obama. And his team, after almost 2 years of very painstaking negotiation, negotiated the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA, and which President Trump, at least candidate Trump, referred to as the worst deal in history. I challenge him to do one better now. I'm not sure he can do it. I know he thinks he's got them in a corner, but it'll be very, very hard. I hope he does, for our sake and the sake of the region and the world. But nevertheless, he withdrew in 2018 from that. Now that agreement, among many other things, limited their ability to enrich uranium to only 3.67% enriched uranium, which is the level you need to run a nuclear reactor for power. And they do have one, and there were plans to build a second one. The Russians helped them build it. And we recognize that it was their right under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, to which they are a party, to be able to do that. They had already accumulated about 11,000 pounds of enriched uranium beyond that level, and they had to give all of that up. And they did. They complied with the agreement. And they were not enriching beyond 3.67. They were limited to producing about 330 kilograms, which is not enough to do anything with, even if they had the ability. They had to get rid of their more advanced centrifuges. They could only keep one, the basic one, to continue enriching at 3.67. So they were very much constrained, and it would have lasted for 15 years. Today, now, it's believed they have, certainly after the attacks last June by the Israelis and the Americans, that they had about almost 1,000 pounds of very highly enriched uranium. That's 20% or above. At 20%, you can produce a dirty bomb. At 60%, in 2 days, you can have 90% enriched uranium, which is all you need for a nuclear bomb. Now, you can do a nuclear bomb at 60%, but it's going to be a lot heavier. You just need more enriched stuff because it's less enriched. After the attacks, we know where 440 pounds of it are. It's somewhere buried in the tunnels below Isfahan, one of their major facilities. The other 440 we think are permanently buried, but we can't confirm it. The Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which was responsible for monitoring the Iranian nuclear program, was asked point blank, what have they got and what are they capable of doing? And he said, well, of course, we got kicked out of the country because in September of last year, It was the last opportunity that the other members of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the other countries, Russia, China, Britain, France, and Germany, the last chance that they can invoke snapback sanctions, meaning if we didn't like the way the agreement, the United States couldn't, we withdrew. If they didn't like the way things were going, then they could say, that's it, we're suspending it, and we're going to keep sanctions in place. And when that happened, it really had an impact on the Iranian economy, which ultimately triggered the demonstrations that happened in January. But it also ended the ability of the IAEA to properly monitor what happens in Iran. Before that, they could go in, and by the way, they had permanently fixed monitors, so it's not like you only do it when you visit. No, they're there 100% of the time. It's connected by satellites, so you can track it all the time. By the way, some people think, well, what happens if they move it? No, if it's got radiation, the signature hangs around for decades, so you're not going to hide it. If you had it there last week, they're still going to be able to detect that you had it, and they can detect at what level. And Grossi said, the Director General, he said, we know that they were at least at 60%. 60%. So where we stand today is we got the 440, we think is buried somewhere in the tunnels below Isfahan. How deep? Probably over 100 meters, over 300 feet. And the others we think are permanently buried, but we can't swear to it. Moreover, we can't confirm the condition because they are, if you have enriched uranium, you have to protect it very carefully, very, very carefully. 3 seconds of exposure will kill a human being. And so they have to contain it in multiple containers, lead, concrete, steel, I don't know what else. And that's what they're supposed to be contained in. So what we don't know is the condition of those containers after the attacks. Recalling the Americans dropped these huge, enormous bunker-busting bombs that can penetrate almost 100 meters, maybe not quite, because you don't actually need to hit it to damage it. If you shake it enough, you can crack the container, which means forget it. You're not going to get close to it. It's basically going to have to remain in perpetuity. So it's rendered effectively unuseful. But we don't know that, and we can't confirm it.
Wow. Unuseful, but also an eternal hazard to anybody who comes near. That's
exactly.
Deeply, deeply concerning. Can we, I want to return to Iran, and I want to get into some of the details about what's coming next, but I'm wondering if you could help us zoom out a little bit to the broader region and draw our attention to some of the fault lines or conflicts or major dynamics unfolding right now, especially as it relates to both the Strait of Hormuz, Israel's politics and goals at this moment, the rest of the Gulf states and what's happening there. What should we be paying attention to as it relates to this broader war?
Yeah, I mean, this war is proving to be potentially transformational for the Middle East. That there'll be a Middle East before this war and a Middle East after. But I can't tell you what the Middle East after is going to look like. With respect to Israel, the other party to this conflict, Iran is a major irritant for the United States. It's not a threat. But for Israel, it's existential. It's a small country. You only need one bomb, and you could take out at least half the country, if not more. And so for Israel, they look at it through a very different prism than the United States does. Which is why the reports of statements from Netanyahu about regime change. I don't know whether he actually believes that he could have done that, but there was discussion of it. I'm pretty sure his top advisors did not believe for a moment that this bombing campaign could have ignited some kind of regime change. You're not going to do it from the air. I don't care how many missiles or bombs you drop. And so they know, however, given what I said before, that they are truly committed to building a nuclear weapon. They spent over $1 trillion. They are potentially a wealthy country, but they're not because of the type of government. They're a pariah. They've got the only country that's sanctioned more is Russia, and that's only because of the invasion of Ukraine. And so they can't break out of these sanctions, which basically constrains their economy. But despite that, they've done pretty well. In many years, under sanctions, you've seen growth anywhere from 2 to 5 or 6%. They're very creative, innovative, and industrious people and society. And so, but they live under this regime. And from the perspective of the Israelis, the only way you truly end Iran's nuclear program is to change the regime. And there's truth to that. Now, the second question is, so how do you do that? And like I said, can't do it from the air. It's just not going to happen. So the Israelis take, I think, from their perspective in protecting Israel, that's a pretty clear-eyed view. They know the threat they're against. They probably devote more of their intelligence resources to Iran than anything else, even more than Hamas or Hezbollah, which is also threatening Israel today. The rest of the region is more complicated. The Gulf is especially difficult. There was a time when the Gulf countries actually were hoping the United States would attack Iran. When we launched, it was famous words from former King Abdullah, when we invaded Iraq, he told the president, "You invaded the wrong country." So they were hoping instead of going left, we'd go right. But we didn't. And so they've always been very wary of the Iranians. I mentioned because of the religious problem, which I don't, sometimes, I mean, some people think it's major. I think it's less significant than people make of it, but there are some people, because there are Shia who live outside of Iran. There's a significant Shia population, about 20% in Saudi Arabia. The majority of Bahrain is Shia, even though the government is Sunni. And a significant number of Shia, they don't publish it, in Kuwait. But nevertheless, all the countries in the Gulf have lived in fear because they understand the ambitions of this regime to establish, to become the established regional hegemon. And that bothers them. Now, within the last few years, they've kind of hedged things because as they saw under the Trump administration, the United States moving closer in the direction of taking more aggressive action in Iran, they wanted to maybe distance themselves a little bit from the United States and see what they could do to demonstrate to the Iranians that, hey, we're not your enemy. We may not particularly care for you, but we're not your enemy. And so Iran and Saudi Arabia reestablished diplomatic relations that they had broken a number of years ago, and all the other countries as well tried to establish a more normal, I wouldn't call it normal, but a more normal, closer to normal relationship with Iran. One exception has been Oman, the country where I served, which has always had, I'd say, a good relationship with Iran, not because they like them. And I've had some of the most senior people in the Omani government tell me that. It's just that when you're a small country of 6 million, and right across the strait, you got a country of 90 million, you've got no choice. It was a major trading partner. By the way, the United States didn't like it. Every time I went back to Washington for consultations, I went in the White House, you know, I got my eyebrows and the hair I had singed because they didn't like the way the Omanis were interacting with the Iranians. And I said, they've got no choice. They've got no choice. And but they've had a good relationship. The good thing was that they shared a lot of what they knew about Iran and what was happening inside Iran, including the Sultan himself would personally share with me what he's seeing, what he's hearing, and so forth, which is extraordinarily useful because we couldn't get intelligence. Their chief negotiator, the Sultan instructed him to meet with me every time he had come back from a trip from Iran. So, but the Omanis have had a very proper diplomatic relationship. They have trade relations. They even do operations like patrolling for fisheries and environmental activities and so forth. But they've always had, all the countries of the Gulf, this wary view toward Iran, this colossus to the north, which is much bigger than all their countries put together. Now, all those countries' armed forces are much smaller than Iran's, even without counting the IRGC. So it's been a delicate relationship for all the Gulf countries, and which is why they've tried to foster close ties with the United States, because basically we are their defensive backstop. They're sitting on who knows how many billions of barrels of oil, more than anybody else on the planet, and they've got this colossus to the north who has eyes on them. And they need somebody that's a big power, and we're the only one that checks the block. I mean, no one else comes close, not even the Chinese, and they know that. But they certainly did not want to get drawn into this war. A number of the countries sort of publicly announced that no offensive operations were taking place from their soil, and that was strictly true. But a lot of stuff that we did during the war happened in their territory. We have huge air base, which basically controlled all the air movement in Qatar. The naval headquarters for the 5th Fleet is based in Bahrain, so they have a huge command center there. We have supply depots up and down the Gulf, including many we have several in Oman. Some of the biggest ones are in Oman, actually, because Oman is not inside the Gulf. It's outside, so there's no threat of trying to access those. But they did not enter the war. They could have. Now, when they came under attack, and by the way, it's important to point out that United Arab Emirates was bombed or attacked by missile twice as often as Israel. 2,500 drone and missile attacks, 2,500. And thanks to our defensive agreement, they had the necessary defenses to shoot down 95% of them. That's pretty good. And now you may have read recently where the Israelis are going to, I don't know whether sell or give or whatever, their dome defensive system, which is extremely effective, probably the most effective in the world, right up there with our Patriot system, which they also have. All the countries had Patriots. I don't know if Oman did. And Oman, by the way, got attacked, which shocked me, because Oman was always the go-between, the interlocutor, the mediator, including in the negotiations that were taking place just before the attacks. So the Omanis were attacked. Everybody else in the Gulf was attacked. And, of course, the Israelis took attacks from Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. So the Gulf is going to be transformed, especially now that we have seen, because once you've rung this bell of closing the strait, you can't unring it. And this is going to be hanging over their heads and our heads and the global economy forever now. And so countries are scrambling to figure out what are they going to do, the countries of the Gulf, to export this product that's in such desperate need around the world. 20% of the world's oil comes out of the Gulf. 20%. It's a lot. You take that offline, and much of it is right now, and you see the consequences today. This is the worst energy crisis we have ever faced, which, of course, begs a solution of some sort. And I can't tell you what it may look like.
I want to follow up on this, because I think for most of us sitting here in Colorado, we're feeling the energy crisis at the pump. We're noticing that our flights are more expensive. But people around the world are feeling this in much more severe terms. Could you just help us contextualize what you mean by the fact that this is the worst energy crisis ever? How is that affecting different communities, different states, different people in the Middle East and also beyond?
Other countries around the world, in Europe, in Asia, in South Asia, who rely on the Middle East for their energy, need that supply. United States does not. We are self-sufficient in oil. We actually do import some. We don't have to, but sometimes commercially it makes sense to export some of our production because we might make a little more than we pay to import. It's a good business decision if you have it available to you. And so we don't need that oil. So we do not face a supply problem. Most of the rest of the world does not have that luxury. They need that supply. Italy, for example, relies heavily on liquefied natural gas coming from the Middle East. And if they don't have it, it's going to be pretty tough to heat Italian homes come wintertime. And that holds for a number of other countries too. And one of the unfortunate things that may result from this is they may have to turn back, the Italians, but also other countries in Europe, to Russia, which they don't want, and they should not want and should not do. And so there's a lot of pressure on European companies to look for alternative sources. The United States, I think, is upping its production of LNG as well as oil, but we're not going to be able to fill a 20% gap. It's just we can't operate that quickly. We can't pump that fast. And so the impact, however, that it's making, you talked about airfares and gasoline prices. Okay, we pay global prices. We pay what everyone else pays. They don't give us any kind of discounts just because it's an American company putting American fuel in your tank. It's going to be world price. You just can't escape the global. That's the global market. Beyond that, we will see impacts in food prices because there will be a shortage of fertilizer and all the inputs to fertilizer, which include, by the way, natural gas, but also nitrogen, by the way, helium. A good portion of the world's supply of helium comes from the Gulf because it's a byproduct of the oil production process, and helium is in great demand in the high-tech sector for producing microchips. So now there's concerns in the tech industry where they're going to get their helium. And it goes on from there. Where we're going to see it next, if we haven't seen it already, and maybe some folks have, is in grocery prices. It's going up. Fuel prices will go even higher. And we'll see, not necessarily in this country, because we'll always have the supply. But in other countries, businesses shutting down. We're already seeing businesses in India, in Japan, and elsewhere shortening their hours. Schools closing early. Government offices closing early. So this is the ripple effect of this conflict. And it'll only get worse. The final point I will mention is, even if the conflict ends tomorrow, it will probably take a year and a half. I hope I'm exaggerating, to get back to something close to normal. But it won't be complete normal because, for example, Qatar, the largest producer of liquefied natural gas, had its main gas facility attacked in a missile attack, and they basically had to shut it down. Now, they have other facilities that process the gas, but it's going to dramatically impact, and they said that could take a couple of years to bring back online. So the ripple effects are very significant and could worsen. We'll see.
That's very alarming. I mean, there's no other way to put it.
Anyone want to order another drink?
Yeah.
This is your time to do it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's talk about this ceasefire then for a second, right? It's a very tenuous ceasefire. How close do you think we are to broader regional escalation right now? Broader and more intense regional escalation? And what do you think are you worried about a particular trigger or miscalculation for that escalation? Is there something that you're worried the U.S. might do, or or Iran might do, that could really set this off even more broadly?
One of the first things I tell students, wars are unpredictable. I don't know what your plan is going in. I guarantee you it's not going to look like that once you're in the war. And anyone who's been in a war knows that. From the top general down to the lowest private or airman. And this war is already proving to be unpredictable. It costs more, it lasts longer, it has much longer term effects, and it affects far more people than are anticipated at the start of the war. And we're seeing all of that too now. In terms of the ceasefire, for the most part, it's holding, but it's only a ceasefire. The president, I think, he extended it for several weeks. I don't know what he's going to do at the end of that if they don't have some kind of agreement. He's pressing very hard to get a nuclear agreement. I don't know the way that he can do it, because on the Iranian side, believe it or not, they're winning. Well, it's a low bar for them, because the definition of winning for them, the regime, is survival. They're still around. They're not going anywhere. You take out the current leadership, they'll go one level down. So I don't know how long he thinks he can continue with this ceasefire. It is true, however, that neither side wants to reignite the war. It's proven very costly for the United States. The Secretary of Defense testified today on the Hill, and he said the cost was $25 billion for 2 months. And now they're going to come in and request a supplemental from the Congress for more, figure unspecified. For those of you who follow defense news, there's been a lot of reporting about the impact it's having on the U.S. Ammunition stock, everything from Patriot missiles to artillery shells and everything in between. And we've expended a lot. Some of our more sophisticated weapons, whether it's air-launched or missile-launched, including naval weapons. And, of course, the big question is, well, what happens if something erupts in the South China Sea, or even worse, Taiwan? Do we have what we need to stand up to China? And on that front, the news is not very inspiring. We have more than enough to sustain what we're doing in Iran, even if we decided to restart the war. But there is this concern about our commitments elsewhere. And by the way, we should be, in my personal view, and are not supporting the Ukrainians enough. But if you follow what's happening, the Ukrainians are doing some pretty remarkable things. They've taken 40% of Russia's energy industry offline. That's pretty amazing for a country that hardly had an air force and not many missiles. So they've done amazing, and that's stuff they learned during the war. So it's realistically, you have to think about what we can get. You know, a lot of, and as a career diplomat, I don't like to categorize it this way, but a lot of political people come into national security policy or foreign policy as Americans, and as politicians, we're going to solve this problem. That's who we are. We roll up our sleeves. This is a problem, and we have got to fix it. It's kind of a nice attitude. You know, if you're running a business, you got to fix the problem or your business doesn't survive. Well, it doesn't work that way when you're dealing with some countries. And some problems with countries just need to be managed. You just need to contain it. And we learned that lesson in the Cold War. That policy did work. The policy of containment in the Cold War worked. And the Soviet Union imploded on its own. No Americans and no Russians were killed in the Cold War. Just everybody woke up, It was like Christmas Day, Merry Christmas. There's no Soviet Union anymore. Had just been there, and I didn't even know it until I got back from Moscow. Some problems need to be managed, and we need to come to an understanding as a country and as a government how we are going to manage the problem of Iran, understanding that it's not just America's problem. It's Israel's problem, it's the Gulf problem, it's the Middle East problem, and now with the impact on the global economy, it's the world problem. What do you do about a country that's dead set on acquiring nuclear weapons? I'll just say, do you want a North Korea in the Middle East? Because that's what they would become if they had a nuclear weapon.
Well, first of all, I'm going to turn it over to all of you to ask your great questions, and I'm hoping one of them will yield an answer that makes me feel better about going to sleep tonight. But I guess I want to get really concrete here, and just to build on what you just said. I mean, very, very specifically, if you were advising the U.S. administration right now, what would you prioritize? And what are the most plausible scenarios for Iran over the next few years? What would you really emphasize we do next?
There's several things. First, would address one of the colossal mistakes this administration made from the very beginning, even before this war started, in that we pushed away our closest allies. The strongest alliance we've had, and actually the most successful alliance in world history, this administration has seemed to make every effort to undermine at every turn. We've insulted them, degraded, demeaned, told them we don't need them, and then we asked them to come and help us out in the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, we hadn't told them we were going to attack Iran. And back in the day when I was serving, we always coordinated closely with NATO, always. Even if they were not involved, we would advise them, we are about to do X, because they were our security partners. They needed to know. And if we had a role we thought they should play, we should have said, and here's where we think we could use your help. Even if they didn't want to participate in the offensive campaign, there are a lot of things they could have done to help us out. For one thing, to allow our aircraft and so forth to use all the bases we already had in Europe, like Spain and Italy. Two NATO allies. Italy is a founding member. And for a short period of time, they wouldn't let any of our aircraft use our bases for operations against Iran. Shoring up our NATO alliance, starting with our good friends to the north, Canada. Secondly, this is a problem, as I said, and we have to find a way to manage it. What's the first priority? You better find a way to open the Strait of Hormuz. Now, they are preventing anything from moving out, and we're preventing anything from moving in. Now, I have to say, the Iranians are as dependent, if not more, on the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf as anyone else. They import in total, 60% of their total imports come through the Gulf. 90% of their oil exports go through the Gulf. So already 60% of their imports offline. Of course, all their oil offline. And this is going to have, and already has had, a substantial impact on their economy. Now, the IRGC, who are often referred to as within the camp of the principalists that adhere to the original precepts of the Islamic Revolution, really don't care about the economy. They don't. The pragmatists, who are still hardline, still believe in the revolution, understand, you have to do both things. We have to find a way to resuscitate our economy. And right now that's not happening. So there is a lot of pressure. So they too need the Gulf reopened. They need our blockade to be lifted. So a lifting for a lifting, obviously, is the first order of business, and extending the ceasefire for a limited period of time to allow for negotiations on the nuclear question, making it clear that we are not going to tolerate, and the president already has, everyone else has too, they're just not acting the way we are, that we are not going to tolerate a nuclear-armed Iran. We're not going to do it. And finding a way to make that happen. Now, the great leverage we have is, again, economic, because their economy is never going to be able to achieve anything close to their potential under the sanctions. And now, like I said before, they're global sanctions again. So it's not just that the U.S. and Europe are sanctioning them. It's everybody. Everybody has to follow the sanctions again. That was not the case before September. And that's why we saw the eruption in the demonstrations in January, because the sanctions were imposed, and it was imposing incredible costs on the economy. And so the principal merchant class, they're called the bazaris, they run the bazaars, they tend to be conservative. They couldn't get any of their wares in. You name it, whether it was consumer goods or industrial goods, whatever it was, they couldn't get it in. So they basically went on strike and shut down, which effectively shut down the Iranian economy. And then the students, labor unions, oil field workers all followed suit, and you had these massive demonstrations in which, sadly, some 30,000 or so Iranians lost their lives. They were mowed down or arrested and then hanged in Evin prison. So they need relief, and the only way they're going to get that sanctions relief is by working a deal on their nuclear weapons program. That's the only escape. It's literally inescapable. I think the pragmatists get it, and they were willing to do something, might be willing to at least talk about it. I'm not sure that the principalists, like the IRGC and some of the other hardliners, do. The last point I want to mention, Iran, at the time of the Islamic Revolution, had declined economically somewhat, but they were exporting close to 6 million barrels a day. They haven't gotten close to that since then. It was a thriving economy. Could have been better. The Shah wasn't exactly a Nobel Prize economist running that country, but they were doing a lot better than they are now. And they have tremendous potential. And they can't get out from under where they are now with a nuclear weapons program. They have to decide whether they want to be a nuclear state or a prosperous Middle Eastern nation. If you look at the time of the revolution, 1979, and compare the state of the Iranian economy with the state of the Gulf countries by that time were prospering from oil. But look what they have done since then. They've invested their oil income. They've all become high-tech. They're investing in high-tech industries in the United States and in China. We sometimes refer to the Gulf countries as the Falcons. They know how to invest and spend their money. Development, investment, looking toward the future. They're pioneering work in green energy with solar technology. A lot of it they're getting from China, by the way. The Iranians, if the Gulf states, you call them the Falcons, the Iranians are the vultures. They prey on the weak states. And we all know who they are. They're the failed states and the near-failed states. Yemen, Libya, Syria, Lebanon. If Libya weren't so far away, they'd go after Libya, and there are no Shia Muslims in Libya. That's where they go, and they prey on them. And those are their allies, which isn't saying much because, like I said, they're pretty much failed states. And they have to find a way to escape this, and they have to have the vision for it. Maybe the pragmatists have it. We don't know. But the principalists most definitely do not. And that's the stumbling block.
There's so many follow-up questions I want to ask you, and to dive into so many of the really important things that you brought up and shared with us tonight. And I trust that you will all ask those great questions for us. So let's get, yeah.
Great. We'll start on this side, and then we'll do one side and then the other.
Hi, thank you very much for this information that you gave today. I have heard of the IRGC and leadership within Iran referred to as a kleptocracy, and that they are making tons of money internally, and that they're very corrupt. And that one of the reasons why they're so tenacious is less so religious fervor than a desire to not give up on all this corruption and the money that they've made there. In addition, that the people hate them so much, particularly after killing so many people, that they know that if they try to cede power, they will be executed. And I'm wondering what you think about that.
It's a really good question, and you're absolutely right. It is a kleptocracy, and one of the problems with the decline in their economy is not just sanctions, it's the gross mismanagement of their economy. In January of last year, the exchange rate of the Riyadh to the dollar was 815,000. Last month, the exchange rate was 1.8 million Riyadh to the dollar. It got so bad that last month, the central bank had to issue a 10 million Riyadh bill, which is worth about $6 or $7. Their economy is in desperate strait. And it's not just because of sanctions. The IRGC actually has become very much like the Egyptian armed forces. They have their money and their hands in all the major industries. All of them, the petrochemical and oil, of course. To the extent there's a technology sector, the building sector, they probably control 50 to 60% of the building sector. If and when they get the capital to rebuild the country after the war, guess who's going to be making all that money? IRGC, because they pretty much run the construction business. Everything from the actual construction to all the materials that go into construction. So they have managed to insinuate themselves in every aspect of the food industry. They control the food industry, or have a significant component of the food industry too. So they're almost self-supporting. They almost don't need the government budget. They're happy to take it, but they get all kinds of income. And a lot of these generals, also have a job running some kind of a business for the IRGC, where they make a considerable amount of money. And this is what infuriates the Iranian people, that some people in Iran are doing very well, thank you, and most of them are those who are very loyal to the regime and invariably have some connection to the IRGC. So, without question, corruption plays a major role in the enormous amount of opposition among the Iranian people to their government.
Question over here.
First of all, thank you for just incredibly informative perspectives. The UAE just announced they're going to leave OPEC. If that were to be a flood of, the first of many countries, what would happen, or what do you predict would happen with the collapse of OPEC?
Well, economics says that once you break up a cartel, then it's the market that takes over, and particularly a lot of smaller producers would begin maximizing production. But honestly, OPEC is not the organization it was that some of us can remember during the days of the oil shocks, when OPEC would impose restrictions on oil production, which drove up prices. That really doesn't happen that often. In fact, it's more often the reverse. And that is, the United States will quietly go to Saudi Arabia during some time of economic trouble. We'll go to Saudi Arabia and say, why don't you work with your OPEC buddies and up production so prices don't go too high? So the market's going to take over, so there's less interference in whatever market forces are in place. I don't think it will address the near-term problem, and I'm not sure other countries want to necessarily leave OPEC yet. The long pole in the tent is Saudi Arabia. They are the world's swing producer. You know, they can turn the spigot on and off. Doesn't bother them one bit. They have the lowest marginal cost. I don't know if there are any oil folks here, but they have the least marginal cost of any oil producer in the world. You can drive the price down. The Soviets or the Saudis are still going to find a way to make money. And it's high in demand because of its purity. It's the only oil that's sweeter is from West Texas. And it's a lot easier to get out of the ground. So if they were to leave, then OPEC is almost out of business. Because then it's mostly a lot of also-rans. I mean, Iraq and Iran are big producers. And there are a few others, but sort of middle road producers. But Saudi Arabia is the big one. I mean, I think the UAE was top 5 somewhere. So that was a big blow to OPEC. And they could easily fold. I think they've outlived, personally, their usefulness myself. They're no longer the political lever they were once intended to be.
I think I've got 2 questions over here, 3. We'll start with one and then jump back over to you, Hugh.
You alluded to Yemen and other countries where there are proxy wars involving several of the nation states. Can you please help us understand what is at stake, whether they are fighting over the rare earth metals and what the consequences are in countries that are suffering so much because of the infusion of arms and money from the major Middle Eastern countries?
Oh, there's no shortage of conflicts around the region where people are suffering. The one that sadly gets least attention these days is in Sudan, and we can't blame that on Iran. They're not involved there. They sort of back the government of Sudan, but at one time so did we. The Russians and the Emiratis, the UAE, are very active there because of the presence of rare earth minerals, in particular gold. But the Iranians are not there. Yemen is an interesting case. There's no other place on planet Earth like Yemen. I've been there several times, and it reminds me of that the first Star Wars movie, that bar you walk into, and all those, that's Yemen. And everybody's wearing it's like that one would be out of a Clint Eastwood movie. Everybody's got bandoleros and big guns, and there's a diplomat walking through them all. Everybody's armed. They're the only country that comes close to the United States in terms of weapons per person, per capita. But the power in force right now are the Houthis, and the Houthis are also very strongly ideological. It's a branch of Shia Islam called Zaydis that are only present in Yemen, and were very loosely connected with Iran prior to about maybe 20 years ago. But the current leader of the Houthis traveled to Iran, ended up forging a relationship, and so now they've gotten assistance, they've got support, weapons. The Iranians have sent Al-Quds Force, which is like a special forces of the IRGC to train Houthis in Yemen, and now they are capable of manufacturing ballistic missiles, which they've had fired against Israel. And of course, they sit right there on the Red Sea, and in particular the Bab el-Mandeb, which is On the other side of the Arabian Peninsula, any ship going into or out of the Suez Canal goes through the Bab el-Mandeb. It's one of those critical choke points in the world. And on the other side is Somalia, which is having problems getting its act together. And the Houthis could shut down the Bab el-Mandeb. And then we'd really be in a world of hurt. Two principal sea lanes into and out of the Middle East would be shut down. The Suez Canal would go broke. Egypt would go broke. So you can just see how this could potentially snowball. Of course, Hamas and especially Hezbollah have gotten considerable support from Iran. I doubt very seriously that either one of them could exist without it. In fact, Hezbollah was established as an extension of the IRGC. They basically have drafted Lebanese to defend Iran. They were set up to serve as a force protection mechanism for Iran in the event Iran was attacked. Now, in June of last year, Hezbollah stood down. They didn't do anything, at least very, very little. But shortly after the attacks on February 28th, I'm sure Iran called in their chit and said, now is your time. We're expecting you to respond, and they have. And, of course, the Israelis jumped in with both feet. And now we have a pretty serious conflict in southern Lebanon. Because if the Iranians decided to cut off their funding to Hezbollah, they would die. There's no way they can get, I mean, yeah, they do other things around the world to earn income, but it doesn't match the funds that they receive from Iran. And even during times of economic difficulty, the Iranians have always been able to fund them. Always. Have never let them down. That's why among the many chants that the Iranians made when they were protesting back in January was no to Hezbollah, no to Hamas, no to the Houthis, yes to the people of Iran. It's a pretty fair argument. And that's another question. Now, the Israelis are handling that themselves. I'm sure we're providing intelligence support, but actually they do a pretty good job. Don't need all that much from us. They probably buying a lot of weapons still to carry out that war. But Syria now, they've been pushed out of Syria, which is one of the good things that's happened in the Middle East in the last not quite year and a half. I know they want in or trying to get in, and so far the current president of Syria has said you're not coming back, which is a good thing. And believe me, without Iran in the equation, not all the problems in the Middle East would go away. You'd still have the problem of the Israelis and the Palestinians, but a lot of the problems would go away. A lot of them.
I'm curious what you think about the importance of perhaps having the person or country that might be mediating or hosting potential talks, and maybe having some say about, maybe you just start with the Strait of Hormuz and maybe might have some actual influence over both parties,
You're referring to Pakistan?
or somebody different than Pakistan? I mean,
Yeah.
I know-
Who should be?
who might actually have some,
I'm not sure there's a perfect one. I mean, Pakistan, I have to say, that surprised me. They've never been known to be a mediator. And, of course, they got their own issues with India, big issues. They got a war themselves right now, a kind of low-level war going on with Afghanistan, dealing with the Taliban, whom, it's important to mention, they backed when we were in Afghanistan. Got to get that out there. And now, you can you can hold the tiger for so long, but pretty soon he's going to turn around and bite you in the face. And that's what the Taliban are doing in Pakistan. So they got their own war going on, and all of a sudden they surface as a negotiator. Are they doing an adequate job? Too early to tell. I will say one entree that they have is they have a very good relationship with China. And there may be a role at some point in this process for China because of their dependence on Gulf oil. They get a significant, I'd say 20% of their oil comes through the Gulf, and just under half of that comes out of Iran. So China needs that oil. Not immediately, because they built up their stocks. So they have adequate stocks to get them well through the summer. But China, if China were to tell Tehran, it's time to do a deal, we got to wrap this up. It's hurting us. It's hurting not only our own business, but all the businesses that we deal with around the world. In Southeast Asia, South Asia, you name it. Because they are all suffering and going to suffer more as long as this energy crisis continues. So perhaps there's a role for Pakistan there. Is there an ideal mediator? The Iranians would never trust the Europeans, never trust the United Nations. Thing is, the Iranians don't have any friends around the world. And even the Chinese and the Russians, they share the same enemy, or the adversary, the United States. Other than that, they have nothing in common. Now they're starting to send some material support to Iran. There are reports that the Chinese are going to be sending some air defense systems because the Iranians lost all of their air defense. The Americans and Israelis had complete control of the Iranian skies. They could fly anywhere they wanted at any time, day or night. They definitely need an air defense system back, starting from radars and surface-to-ground missiles and so forth. There's some reports that Chinese may be doing that, and a few other things that Chinese are doing. They're probably sharing intelligence with the Iranians, as are the Russians, definitely. Russians cannot help materially because they have their own war going on. I just don't, it's tough to find a mediator here, and if Pakistan's willing to carry the load for the time being, and the administration trusts them, which is really important, and the Iranians trust them, then perhaps they're the right address.
We've got 2 questions here, and they'll probably be our last questions of the night.
Perfect. We'll take them together too. And
Yeah.
it's not sticking, everybody. It seems to be this late spring snow that we are getting. I keep looking behind.
Oh, good.
Yeah. We'll get you out of here before it starts sticking, I promise.
Okay, thank you. So actually, my original question was going to ask about China, but since you already answered that, my next would be the strength of the Kurds and what you think that might be as a leveraging point within Iran.
And the second question.
Do you want them both?
Yep.
Okay. When I look at the Middle East, you can go back to the Balfour Agreement in 1900s, and then, but what is really the irritant under the saddle in the Middle East? What country is a Western country in the Middle East? Israel. What's your comment on Israel's impact in living in the Muslim, Arab, Islamic world?
Yeah, okay. On the Kurd question, it's pretty straightforward. I know there was talk at one point, and I think it was initiated in Israel, about potentially arming Iranian Kurds. There's a sizable Iranian or a Kurdish population, mostly in the northwest of the country, along the border with Iraq and Azerbaijan, and this is a population that Iran monitors very closely, because they faced problems there before, and they watch very carefully what happens. But the Kurds themselves, it's important to note, are not united. They may not like the regime, but not all of them are willing to grab a gun and fight them. There are probably 3 different factions, only one of which would be willing to take up arms, and they would be no match. and it would be suicidal, and it would be criminal for the United States or Israel to arm them. It would be suicidal for them, and we shouldn't do it. They stand no chance. Now, if you could, and this would take a lot of time and effort, unite other ethnic groups, particularly the Baluchis, the Azeris. And there are about 13 ethnic groups in Iran, but those are the largest. Then you could potentially stress the leadership. But Kurds alone, not a prayer. With respect to Israel, they are in the Middle East. It's where they want to be. They are recognized as a state since 1948. They were recognized by the United Nations. They're a member of the United Nations. They're not going anywhere. For a long time, many of the Arab countries entertained this fiction that they could force them out, sort of looking on them as the latter-day crusaders. Well, they succeeded. After 80 years, they forced out the crusaders. Well, the crusaders had somewhere to go, back to Europe. Technically, Israelis could probably come, to America, but that's not what they want. That's where they want to be, and that's where they deserve to be. And it is a Western-oriented society, and it's a very close ally of the United States. And we're going to continue supporting them. We have every single administration since Harry Truman, and I don't think that's going to change for the foreseeable future. I will say, however, the American public feels kind of torn right now.
Excuse me, I interrupt you. What I'm trying to ask is, what is the Middle Eastern countries, not our support of them or their support of how long they've been there, but what is the Middle Eastern countries feeling towards a Western nation? What is their opinion of Israel? In other words, they want it.
Okay.
I can repeat that quickly if you couldn't hear too. Asking really, what is the opinion of other states in the Middle East? How are they feeling towards Israel at this moment in time? Yeah, thank you.
There are two answers to that. If you go to then you're talking about all the Arab governments. Most of the Arab governments, even if they don't have a formal relationship with Israel, have made their peace with Israel. They have acknowledged Israel's there, and they're not going anywhere. And by the way, Israel now is the most powerful country in the Middle East. And they're willing to live with that. And I think, and this gets to the second answer, is that they could address the Palestinian issue, that you'd find many of them stepping up and formalizing their relationship with Israel. Israel really doesn't feel threatened by its Arab neighbors anymore. That's not to say that it couldn't change. But I don't think it's going to. And the United States has obviously played a very heavy hand in that by our support of Israel and working with other Arab countries. I can't count the number of times that the United States has inserted itself in the Middle East. Of course, we've always done it politically and diplomatically. I was a part of that. And we all know the story from the first Gulf War, 1958 in Lebanon. We sent the Marines ashore to tamp down a possible revolt to overthrow an elected leader. So we've always been involved in that. But in those days, it was largely because of the state of Israel. We felt obliged in some cases to come to defend, but not always. Iraq was different. And of course, we made all sorts of promises about this is it, we're getting out of the Middle East. Everybody since George W. Bush has said this, Barack Obama said it, and Donald Trump has said it, and Joe Biden has said it. We're getting out of the Middle East. I refer to the Middle East as America's Hotel California. You don't remember the operative line, you can check out anytime you want, but you can't leave. And by the way, China loves this because seeing the United States once again entangled in a very costly, drawn-out war it plays exactly into their interests. And we have to be aware of that. We need to tie this up and focus on what's existential for the United States, which is China and Russia.
Thank you.